I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast.
Boy, Rob, 2022 has been quite a year.
Yeah?
You go with the thing. Nate, what a year it's been.
What a year it's been, Nate.
Anyway, this is really kind of had not been planned out particularly well. This is our year in review, 2022, where we talk about various media we consumed and just kind of take it from there.
Per usual, you saw way more movies than I did.
Yeah. So this has not been particularly well coordinated. We're going to hit several topics, and I'll give it a start talking about books.
Okay.
So book highlights for 2021 or 2022 for me. I'm not a fast reader. I didn't read a ton of books this year, but some that stand out for me was The Yiddish Policeman's Union by Michael Chabon.
Okay.
Which is kind of an alternate history where at the beginning of the Second World War, a homeland was carved out in Alaska for refugee Jews. So as a result of that, far fewer Jews were killed in the Holocaust. But as a consequence of that, the Germans didn't spend so much money exterminating Jews. They spent it on the war, so they beat the Soviets. And so when the war ended with America getting the nuclear bomb, you have a post-World War II world in which there is no Cold War because the communists have been defeated. And the book is a murder mystery set in the Jewish district in Alaska, which is on the verge of being readmitted to the state of Alaska jurisdictionally, meaning that a lot of these Jewish persons are being displaced. I thought it was really a clever idea, a pretty good mystery. I read Charles Bukowski's Post Office Trilogy. It's kind of the blue-collar poet. It's a pleasure to read, but he's very vulgar. One of the areas of interest that I have of long-standing is things dealing with Mormonism from all perspectives. So I read things from Patrick Mason's Planted, which is part of the kind of softer neo-apologetics, to Fawn McKay Brody's classic No Man Knows My History, which I would argue is not in 2022 the anti-Mormon work that appeared in 1945. Because a lot of the things it talked about that were controversial then are more or less acknowledged now. And then I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I never watched the iCarly, but I knew who she was. And this book is like one of the publishing phenomenons of 2022. It's already gone through multiple printings. Like there was more demand than the publisher had anticipated. And it's about her crazy growing up with a mother that forced her into the industry against her wishes, and the title is not quite as macabre as it sounds, macabre, but she had to die for her to be basically freed from the industry, and she no longer acts.
I read 4 that were released in 2022.
Okay.
One was the Desert Star, which is the most recent installment in the Harry Bosch franchise.
Okay, yeah.
It's the Harry Bosch, Renee Ballard. It's both of them in it. I read one called 0 Hour, and then When the Moon Turns to Blood, which I talked to you about from Leah Satili.
Okay.
And then John Grisham's newest one, Sparring Partners. But the best books that I read in 2022 were, in no particular order, the worst book was The Black Dahlia.
Oh, The Black Dahlia by Lehman?
James Ellroy.
James Ellroy, yeah.
Yeah. So the best ones I read this year, The Tattooist of Auschwitz, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan Safran Foer.
You hadn't read that before?
No, not before this year.
Okay.
Citizen Soldiers by Stephen Ambrose.
Okay.
The Library Book by Susan Orlean. And...
Is that the orchid keeper, the orchid thief lady? Susan Orlean?
let me double check.
That the Charles Kaufman film adaptation was adapted from?
Yes.
Okay.
The Library Book is about the fire at the LA Library many years ago. The Help I read for the first time this year.
Haven't seen the movie yet, as you mentioned earlier today. Podcasts?
You want me to go first on this one?
Well, I actually only have one entry, because there's only one podcast I started listening to this year that I hadn't been listening to previously, and that is The Plot Thickens TCM podcast. I am early in season 4. They all have to do with things in film history. Season 1, I'm trying to remember what season 1 was about. Season 4 is about Pam Grier, and season 3 is about Lucille Ball, and season 2 is about the movie The Bonfire of the Vanities, and season 1 is simply escaping me.
Yeah. I started listening to that one this year, but I've only listened to season 4.
Well, season 1 was Peter Bogdanovich.
Oh, yeah.
Peter Bogdanovich narrated his life.
You did tell me
all
about
very
that one.
interesting.
New ones for me this year, these would be my top, I guess, 7. Well, not my top 7. I'll give you my top 5, and then 2 that I'll mention that aren't even necessarily honorable mentions. The top 5 I'm going to put out in no particular order. Bone Valley was quite good. It's about a potential wrongful conviction down in Florida. Quite strong evidence that it's a wrongful conviction, and the state just isn't willing to even entertain the possibility that this person who's confessed to this crime has much more plausibility. The only physical evidence connecting him to that connects anyone to the murder connects this guy, but they still just don't want to admit that they might have gotten the wrong guy.
Okay.
Burn Wild, which was from Leah Satili. We talked about it briefly in another podcast about the Earth Liberation Front.
Okay. Is this a New Hampshire public radio one?
No.
No, okay.
No, but Burn Wild was about how, like, they criminalized the ideology.
That they were getting more stiffer sentences than...
Like right-wing extremists who actually were committing acts of violence, even though no one had been harmed in their crimes. They were labeled domestic terrorists, whereas many other right-wing extremists, like the Bundys, are not.
Oh.
So there was one actually locally produced called The Letter by KSL, which was surprisingly good. And they partnered with a company called Lemonada Media on that. It's about a family here in Murray who their son was murdered, and the person who committed the murder eventually ended up writing a letter to the family. There was kind of this weird roundabout connection through someone who worked at the jail, wrote a letter to the family, and the family ended up embracing the individual who murdered their son.
Oh, wow.
In just kind of a weird, really strange roundabout way. And it was genuinely touching. So, The Trojan Horse Affair, which was kind of controversial, I liked that one. And then the last one in my top 5 is Will Be Wild, which did a pretty deep dive into circumstances surrounding January 6th.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So, and then the 2 that I will mention, one that's kind of an honorable mention is La Monstre, which is about a serial killer in Belgium.
All right.
And then the other one that I will mention, I'm not going to refer to it as an honorable mention. It is very unique, but it was an interesting look at the circumstances. It's called Infamous Boys Gone Wild, which is about the Joe Francis who ran Girls Gone Wild. And the way in which that franchise came to an end is very, very unique.
Yeah.
And this delves into that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And the person who basically brought that about is in prison to this day while Joe Francis is free.
Oh.
So.
Do you want to do TV?
I didn't put anything down for TV, so you go for it.
I didn't really put much down for TV either. My 2 main projects, 'cause I'm not a binger. Sometimes, it's like I can't just watch the same show throughout. It's like, nah. But I will do like a daily thing, usually during the hour where I cook and eat my dinner. And so this year, I focused on syndicated space station-based science fiction of the 1990s. And I watched all of Deep Space Nine and all of Babylon 5. It was my 3rd time through for Babylon 5. Technically my 2nd all the way through, because I didn't really start to watch the show regularly in the 90s until season 2. And then it's the first time I've watched every single episode of Deep Space Nine. And I thought both shows held up really well.
Yeah. Your Deep Space Nine one kind of carried over to me in a kind of fun way. You wrote up a list of movies or episodes for me to watch.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which brings us to film, unless you have another category you want to
Nope.
squeeze in here. All right. So I guess I'll go first, because I'm going to have more to talk about, and we'll talk about things that we may have overlapped. I don't think there'll be very many of them.
There's a couple that I've seen that I don't think you've seen, but they're all documentaries.
Okay. How many do you got? Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I only put down 5 that were 2022 releases, and then 3 documentaries.
All right, let's do you first.
I'm sure that most of these will have overlap. Pretty close to the top for me for the year was Top Gun Maverick.
Yes, that is on my top 5.
Yeah.
We did a whole episode about it.
It just held up quite well. It It was a very enjoyable movie to watch. It was a very enjoyable moving going experience, and for a return to that franchise, it did a pretty decent job. So, another one I saw from 2022. We touched briefly on this in a pre-podcast conversation earlier tonight. Deep Water.
Okay.
With Ben Affleck and Anna de Armas. That was not a good movie. I would not recommend that to very many people, but that was a 2022 release I saw. Another one that's high on my list, 13 Lives. Ron Howard.
That's going to make a reappearance when we go through my list.
Not super high on my list, Jurassic World Dominion.
Yes, and I'll have some things to say about that.
Yeah. Again, also not super high on my list, Falling for Christmas.
I don't know if I know this
Lindsay
one.
Lohan.
This is the Lindsay Lohan one.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I did watch 3 particularly good documentaries this year that all were good enough that I want to mention them specifically.
Okay.
The first was called Downfall, which was about Boeing.
Okay.
And that was fairly well done, and it was also around the same time that Boeing was then having problems with their space capsule.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned this.
Ended up, it was not. It didn't go great for Boeing. The next one has a slight connection to that. It's called Return to Space, which is about the launching of astronauts from U.S. soil.
Okay. So that's fine. Yeah. So we still don't. NASA's still not sending people up directly. It's all farmed out now.
Yeah. They have.
Are they ever going to do it again?
Yes. So they did the test launch of their Artemis capsule.
Okay.
Which went out and around the moon, orbited the moon. I forget exactly how many.
With
orbits.
a guy in it?
No.
Okay.
This was the test.
Okay.
So they sent it out empty, and it orbited the moon. I forget how many times before returning to Earth. They overlapped its time and space in orbiting the moon with the 50th anniversary of Apollo 17.
Okay.
That was not its intended time frame, but that's how it worked out. But we have been launching our astronauts through basically SpaceX.
Yeah. It'd be really awkward to piggyback off of the Russians now.
Well, actually, we still did launch another astronaut via
Up there.
the Soyuz this year. And the Russians launched an astronaut on a SpaceX capsule.
Oh.
But Boeing was supposed to have had their I think they call it the Starliner capsule in service by now, and has not gotten that certified for human flight, or even done its test flight with humans on board yet. So, right now, SpaceX is the only one ferrying astronauts to and from the space station, and it also has flown private citizens into space and back. So, again, following a little bit of a theme. The last one I just watched recently was Goodnight Oppie, and that was spectacular. That was really quite good.
All right, tell me about it.
It's about the Spirit and Opportunity rovers when they were sent to Mars.
When you texted me, I read it as Goodnight Opie, and I'm like, is this a Ron Howard documentary?
No, it's Oppie.
Oh, okay.
Which was a nickname for the Opportunity rover. Spirit and Opportunity were launched real close together, landed 3 weeks apart on the surface of Mars. The planned mission for these rovers, like the expected time frame for them to operate, was 90 days. And Opportunity continued to operate for, it was like a decade and a half. I can't remember if it was 14 years or 18 years that it continued to operate before it finally its power levels got so low that it couldn't keep its computer components warm enough, and they froze, and it never responded. Spirit had quite a few more problems all along the way. It was kind of the problem child of the two, but even that one lasted for like 7 years before it finally died off. But there was this tremendous connection. There was students who were in JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, when Opportunity landed on Mars, who then went through college, got their degrees, and went back to work for NASA at JPL, working on the rover project. And that was the career path they chose because of what happened while these were being launched and delivered in Mars, and the excitement. And Opportunity just really genuinely developed this long following because it just continued to operate for so long and made such great discoveries along its way on Mars. And they kind of had a little bit of personality, both of the rovers, and people really connected with them. And it was quite a good documentary. So
these would technically be Red Rovers.
Okay.
Red Rover, send data right over.
Leave it to you, Nate. So, yeah.
Those are the movie highlights that you have?
Yeah.
All right, well, I got a bunch of them. I will try to be as condensed as I can. There wasn't really this year, talking about bad movies, and I think part of it is because, I don't generally go out of my way to see a new bad movie. If I'm going to see something bad, it's going to be vintage.
Yeah.
But probably the worst movie this year also contains an Oscar-caliber performance, and we mentioned this before recording, and that is Blonde, in which Ana de Armas gives a very strong lead performance of Marilyn Monroe in a trashy, exploitive movie that felt dirty, in part because this is the first NC-17 film I've ever seen. And it earned that rating. And it is nearly 3 hours of basically Marilyn Monroe being tortured. Just horrible things happening to her and people treating her horribly, and you feel bad for her. It was something. So the bad movies that I was going to talk about, most of them aren't really bad, but they're more like disappointing bad. Like probably the most disappointing film of the year for me was The Pale Blue Eye.
Okay.
Which is based on a novel. It's about fictional murder mystery at West Point in 1830, in which Christian Bale plays a police detective, now retired from New York City, who, because of his proximity to West Point, is brought in to investigate a suicide, which had some kind of occultic things that happened to the corpse afterwards. And the detective befriends a young Edgar Allan Poe, played by Dudley Dursley from the Harry Potter films, who basically steals every scene he can and just chews it up. And, I mean, it looked great, and I liked the idea, but it was just kind of boring and kind of there, and there just wasn't enough suspects to be like, well, these people did it. It's like, because there's nobody else to have done it. So I was pretty disappointed with that. Don't Worry, Darling was... I really hated the twist. There's multiple twists, and they just didn't. I don't really understand why this movie was made. If they really had that much to say with it, I mean, this is basically kind of a Matrix-y kind of thing with 1950s housewives. And the story of the troubled production is far more interesting than the movie itself. Thor: Love and Thunder, been there, done that, and it's like you need to use... Taika Waititi is a spice, best used sparingly.
But they brought Natalie Portman back for that.
Yeah. I don't really care.
Okay.
I don't think it was very good. Where the Crawdads Sing. This is a best-selling American novel.
Yeah.
And all the
Whose film
limitations that implied.
Well, and its film adaptation was brought about by Reese Witherspoon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And it's got Daisy Edgar Jones from... we did multiple podcasts on it. The miniseries about the Mormon murders.
Oh, Under the Banner of Heaven.
Yes. So she's great, but the movie's really mediocre, and it feels like it could have been made 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I Heard the Bells is a Christian film about the composition of the hymn I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. The company that produced it basically did Christian stage productions. This is their first movie, and it feels like a stage production. It's an interesting story, but the way they play it is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, he goes from the highest to highs, like ridiculous, silly highs, to the lowest of lows, and you're supposed to be there with him, and it's just like way too strong, and I found it off-putting. So it pushed me away rather than pulled me in. And then
I've actually seen a couple people online that really liked that film.
Yeah, I know. You sent me a thing from Salt Lake, some kind of local news, and they were like they drank that Kool-Aid and they were happy.
Yeah.
The last one on the bad, disappointing list for me is Jurassic World Dominion, which we mentioned earlier, which when I saw it, I was actually pretty satisfied with it. And I think the main reason I was afraid that they would just totally screw up the distribution of screen time for the characters, bringing together the three from the first one and those from the rebooted trilogy. And I thought everybody got screen time they deserved, and I kind of like seeing these characters together. And I kind of liked that it went a little in directions that we weren't expecting, but locusts. And the big thing that people said about it is they had been building up to dinosaurs in the cities. And they didn't give us dinosaurs in the city, a little bit on Malta. But like the thing that you want to see in the movie, it's like the thing, it's not really in the movie.
I just found
there's a lot of retread.
I just didn't really care about anything.
Yeah.
Or anyone.
I thought it was significantly better than the one immediately before it.
I disagree. Mm-hmm. I feel like
I hated the middle one.
I feel like it's been a steady decline.
Mm. So it is a pure mediocrity. It is. I mean, the problem with a lot of these franchises is there's just not a lot of thought or effort put into it, and the demand is so high, but the standards are so low.
It also felt beyond formulaic because it just was so. Yeah.
It did feel like it was assembled from bits and pieces of other movies. I mean, that middle segment was a Daniel Craig Bond movie.
Yeah.
And then I have a subcategory of bad movies, which I call fun bad. There is a guy named Brad Jones who's a YouTuber. He's got a persona called the Cinema Snob who watches bad movies in the guise of a pretentious cinema snob. And he also does current movie reviews. And both of these movies came out the same weekend in I think February. And he said it was an embarrassment of riches. They're both awful, but you need to see them both in the theater. And so I saw both of them in the theater. The first was a film called The King's Daughter that was actually filmed in like 2014 and was held up because the company that made it like went under, and it just kind of kept passing through hands and eventually came out where the lead actress, Kelly, and I forget her last name, was like 22 when she made it, and she's now like 29 and has 2 kids. And it is a princess movie about a princess that saves a mermaid. And the special effects look like they're from 20 years ago. And the king is
Pierce Brosnan.
Pierce Brosnan, who's having a ball being over the top.
The lead you're talking about was Kea Scodelario.
Yeah. It's bad.
It's got William Hurt.
Well, one of his last release roles. So I went to see it in the Dollar Theater, which has since closed. And I think there were probably about 10 people in the theater. And I am laughing at places where no one else in the theater is laughing. Like a song's coming, and just all the cliches made this kind of a delight. But it is a bad movie. And then Redeeming Love is a Christian movie that got, I want to say Paramount put it out. It got a wide release. It's based on early 90s Christian romance, which is a retelling of a biblical book. I want to say Hosea, one of the more obscure books. And I guess part of that book is a prophet being commanded to marry a prostitute. And this is about a prospector in California in the 1800s who asks God to deliver him a woman, and he feels that God is leading him to a high-end prostitute in the local gold mining community. And they tell her story. It's basically a story of human trafficking in the 19th century. And it's this weird mix of stuff that shouldn't be together. There's parts of it that I thought were actually pretty effective, but it also had really simplistic solutions to everything. She just needs a good man, and she'll have her faith in God restored. And it's fun.
It sounds a little.
It's so bad it's good.
It sounds a little quixotic.
Yeah, it shouldn't exist. That's the best thing about this movie is it should have been made because
it sounds like it's got parallels to Don Quixote.
It's a dirty Christian movie. It shouldn't exist.
Okay.
All right, honorable mentions. I'll try to go through these quick. X and Pearl. These are horror movies in a series. I forget the name of the director, but they both star Mia Goth, the one-time Mrs. Justin Bieber, if I remember correctly. She's quite good. She is kind of the auteur of horror films, and they're monster movies that have as kind of a subtext the American porn scene. The first one is in the late 1970s Texas, and the other one is in the 19-teens. And Mia Goth plays more than one character, at least in the first one, which is set in the 70s, and then the second one is the backstory of that character, and there's a third that will be coming out this year, which will be what happens to the second character she played from the first film in a really bizarre trilogy that And visually, they're very different. The first one is very gritty, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, dusty Texas. And the second one is The Wizard of Oz, bright Technicolor, and wants to be a musical, but always kind of stays a little shy of that. The Outfit. The Outfit is a film with Zoe Deutsch and Mark Rylance. Zoe Deutsch is working for a tailor in New York who's British, who might have a nefarious side business. And there's the mob, and it's kind of like a stage play. There's not very many sets and very many characters, and it's got a good sense of tension, and it's just kind of fun. Aileen is the non-authorized Canadian biopic of Celine Dion, shot principally in French. The actress, director, co-screenwriter of the film plays Celine Dion from the ages of 6 to 47, even though she's 56, and it's all done in digital de-aging, and it's creepy, funny, bad movie of the week, but kind of wonderful at the same time, because Celine Dion, she's Celine Dion, is not going to be a deep biopic. The best biopic of her is going to be, frankly, kind of silly and over the top. And I pretty much love this movie. The Northman. Did you ever see The Northman? This is David Edgars, who did The Witch and The Lighthouse. In this one, he's given a huge budget and an international cast to film a very Viking story from a very Viking point of view. It's that kind of moral system. It's kind of fascinating. I didn't love it as much as some people I know loved it, but it's visually one of the more memorable movies of the year. Confess Fletch, which is the reboot of the Chevy Chase genre now, or franchise, now with John Hamm, who's a great choice. And I want them to make more of these. This was fun. My dad would have liked this movie. Lal Singh Chaddha, which is an Indian remake of Forrest Gump.
Oh, yeah.
Transplanting his baby boomer odyssey to the 70s, 80s, 90s, and aughts in India. You have him in footage with Bollywood stars. You have him meeting a 1990s prime minister. It's pretty faithful remake, but they have to make their changes. So life is not like a box of chocolate. It's like a box of these like Indian cookies, and he's not telling the story on a park bench. He's telling it on a train, and they just kind of mix things up a bunch. I Want You Back, which I believe you watched as well. It's got Jenny Slate and one of the guys from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They had both been dumped by their longtime romantic partners, and they decide to conspire together to sabotage each other's partner's current relationship so they can get each other back. And I enjoyed it more than I've enjoyed a romantic comedy in a while, because it was just different enough.
Oh, I didn't love this movie. The things that worked about it is it felt kind of like a Nora Ephron rom-com. But it was made overcomplicated. But when you take and strip it down to the basics, it worked. And it kind of won me over. I think it was actually the plane that won me over, because it actually returned back to the formula. But it inserted a whole bunch of crap along the way that just was wasteful, if you ask me.
I thought that was kind of a meta commentary on the whole genre of the rom-com, because these people are not really good people. And do they deserve the happy ending? Do they learn from the journey they're on?
I would say yes. I don't remember everything about this one off the top of my head, but it was that middle part that was so off-putting that it was hard to win me back, but it did end up winning me back. I only gave it 7 out of 10 stars, so it wasn't great, but it had potential to be a much better film. But it's really probably the first rom-com I can recall that really had that feeling of like a Nora Ephron, like You've Got Mail, Sleepless in Seattle. It really genuinely had those type of a feel for limited portions of the movie.
But you feel it basically overplayed its hand. It went a little too dark.
No, it was the tech stuff along the way that was just wasteful. But when you strip all the rest of that away and make it about the human connections, then it worked.
Yeah. Vengeance. This is the B.J. Novak scripted and starring film about a writer from New York. He's a magazine writer who has this dream of being in a podcast, a successful podcast, but he doesn't have anything to say. And then something lands in his lap where a woman that had been an occasional multi-night stand had died, in Texas and had left her family with the impression that they were very close on the verge of marriage. And so he feels guilted to go to the funeral and then quickly realizes, oh, she died. It looks like of a drug overdose. And these are crazy people in Texas that refuse to believe she died of an overdose. They're conspiracy theorists. I got a podcast. And so he decides to kind of exploit them, but they actually have an effect on him. And it's got a surprisingly impressive supporting turn by Ashton Kutcher as this kind of small town quasi-record producer, philosopher guy who gets to spout a lot of deep or semi-deep stuff. It's different. It doesn't 100% work, but it's, it's a very 2022 movie. Like, it captures the opioid thing. It captures the podcast mania, the conspiracy theoryism. I mean, when they teach a class on the 2020s in the 2070s, they'll put this on the syllabus. My final honorable mention is Spirited, which is deconstructed A Christmas Carol with Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds. Most of the people I know that have seen it weren't a big fan of the music. They thought the music slowed it down, kind of irked them. I liked the music. I think it worked because it was musical. And I liked that Will Ferrell was playing a kind of depressed counterpart to Buddy the Elf as the Ghost of Christmas Present, who's been doing this for a long time, is just not satisfied because it doesn't matter how many jerk bosses or Karen neighbors you save, it's not going to have a big effect on humanity as a whole. So I liked it. Which brings me to my top 10 of 2022. Number 10, Elvis. Elvis is a biopic by Baz Luhrmann of Romeo and Juliet fame. It helps to know about Elvis going into this because he just picks certain elements of Elvis to concentrate on. It's not like the most thorough of biopics. So there's a little bit about the making the cheesy movies. There's about him dealing with celebrity early on, him going to war. The comeback special is a huge part of it. And then the descent into kind of a personal hell in Las Vegas. And, of course, the relationship with Colonel Tom Parker, played by Tom Hanks, going really campy, and Austin Butler, who plays Elvis, will be nominated for an Academy Award. I don't think he would or should win, but it's a strong performance. He's been in bit parts. He was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and a few other things. So it's not his first film, but his first starring role, and he really channels Elvis. There's so many Elvis impersonators, but to do that kind of the surfacey things, but also bring a depth to him, which he does, is a real accomplishment. Number 9, 13 Lives.
Yeah. This was good.
I forget if it was you. I think you were one of the people who encouraged me to see it. And this, of course, about those soccer team in Thailand that was trapped in a cave during an early flood season in Thailand.
Yep.
And it's just good.
Yeah.
It's just a good kind of procedural. How do we get them out of the cave?
And Ron Howard directed, and he does what he does well and focuses on the human perspective. Mm-hmm. And just, he talks about the experience of the cave rescuers and highlights kind of some of the experiences of the families waiting outside. But a lot of it's told through the perspective of the guys who did the actual rescue, which was an extremely technical and dangerous rescue. They had to straight up sedate the kids in masks and just bind them, tie them up so they could drag them underwater.
Yeah.
Yeah. Incredible rescue.
Yeah. Yeah, I learned a lot. And, Thailand, you never see that in film. So that was interesting. Number 8, White Noise, based on a book from the 1980s, kind of a satirical book.
I'm not surprised this made your top 10.
It's very 80s, and it's all over the place. There's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. There's National Lampoon's Vacation. It has definite segments to the film. The last half of the film is more reflective. It was just so desperate and so all over the place, but it came together at the end. And I was really satisfied, and stay through the closing credits because they're awesome. Number 7, this is one that I've been begging you or encouraging you to see. It's one of the real surprise hits of the year, which was Everything Everywhere All at Once. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness could have just as well been on my worst films of the year list as there were. I mean, the Marvel things more or less run its course, really. This takes the multiverse in a really weird perspective and uses it as a device for healing a mother-daughter relationship among first and second generation Americans. Got Michelle Wu in it, and I can't remember his name. Short Round from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Oh, yeah.
He's back. He's acting, and there's been a little talk about maybe an Oscar nod. I don't know if he's quite up to that level, but Michelle Yeoh should get an Oscar nomination. It's a strange film. Really eccentric sense of humor. It's from the people that did Swiss Army Man. You ever see that?
I don't think so.
It's about Paul Dano rides Daniel Radcliffe's farting corpse off of an island.
Okay.
It's weird.
Yeah. Were you talking about Hoi Kwan before?
I think so, yeah. Number 6, The Whale. Set in Idaho.
Yeah.
Based on a play by an Idahoan about a morbidly obese gay man who is teaching courses online because he's a English professor. In his apartment, he had left his wife and child some years previous to hook up with a former student who subsequently died, and he coped with it by eating and isolating himself. And it is, as I'm watching it, I didn't realize it was based on a play, and I'm like, is this a play? And it is. It's only got 6 or 7 characters, I think 6 characters if you include the pizza delivery man. It's just really good. I mean, these are characters you don't usually see. This is a setting you don't usually see. It's kind of a probing, really interesting film. Of course, this is Brendan Fraser's comeback vehicle. He's under very heavy prosthetics, which could be gimmicky and kind of is, but also is essential to the plot because this character is a 600-pound man, a sad 600-pound man. It's kind of a companion piece to The Wrestler, which is another Darren Aronofsky film about people that have kind of screwed up their lives trying to see if they can make it good to one extent or another as they are in ill health. Really, really impressive film. It's not higher on the list because it is a play. And so it doesn't take as full advantage of the world of cinema as the subsequent films in my list will.
I've heard kind of a little bit mixed things about The Whale in its critic reviews. People are liking a lot of aspects of it, especially Brendan Fraser's performance. But a lot of people are getting hung up on, in this day and age, to turn around and body shame. And, like, to literally call it The Whale when it's about a guy who's so large and things of that nature. And it seems to apparently diminish the experience of large people in the healthcare industry.
Well, part of that is a callback to Moby Dick, which is referenced throughout the film. So there's a thematic consistency. It's not mere exploitation.
Well, they say it's... even that was exploitive is in some of the stuff I've heard. So, but everyone still says it's worth seeing for Brendan Fraser.
He will win the Oscar.
Everyone's giving it the grades that I'm hearing for it. They use a different scale than we use, but they're giving it like a B plus.
I'd probably B plus, A minus, probably an A minus. Number 5, we're going to agree on this one, which is Top Gun Maverick, which was a great cinema experience. It was fun to see.
It was just a great blockbuster.
Throwback blockbuster.
But it accomplished more than it needed to.
It did.
And with the inclusion of Iceman,
Val Kilmer, and how they worked that in, Tom Cruise's insistence on some of the practical effects and holding out until they could put it in the theaters. And I liked that because this is a franchise they could have made. This came out in '86, the original Top Gun. They could have made Top Gun 2 in 1987. They could have made Top Gun 2 at any point in the subsequent 35 years. And this film, you had the sense that 35 years had passed. Like, too often they want to be like, act almost like no time's passed. But, like, Tom Cruise's character is a different guy. He has gone through 35 years and he has matured. There's certainly through lines in his character, but 35 years have passed. And, there's good parallels to the original film. It's got a beach sports scene. It's got the mission at the end. I think it really kind of turned, like, it was approaching things fairly serious. And then at a certain point, it's like, this Top Gun movie, we're going all out. This is cheesy adventure, behind enemy lines crap, and you're going to love it, and I loved it.
And it worked.
It completely worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, for a sequel this far removed from the original, I don't think anything approaches it.
Well, and we've talked about in this podcast, there's a lot of movies that are worth seeing on the big screen, and we talk about that to a certain extent, especially when we go watch some of the older movies on the big screen. Mm-hmm. But this was a movie that really deserved to be seen on as big of a screen as you could see it. And I'm glad that they held out for a theatrical release.
Well, yeah, you could not.
I mean, a lot of movies went straight to streaming the last few years.
You couldn't do it this one. That would be a crime. Number 4, She Said. This is about the 2 investigative reporters for the New York Times, played by Zoe Kazan and Carey Mulligan, who basically brought down Harvey Weinstein through an investigative report, and it talks about the various victims that they interviewed. Ashley Judd appears as herself in the film. Rose McGowan is not in the film. They have voice actress play her in phone conversations. Samantha Morton is in this film. She has one scene. She also has one scene in The Whale. She steals both. It's a good movie. It's an investigative reporter movie in that tradition, and everybody has to talk about All the President's Men. That's the obvious point of reference. This is better than The Post. This is the best investigative journalism movie since Spotlight. And it's got an interesting wrinkle in that these are working mothers. They have children. They have husbands that are good husbands because they're taking care of the kids and letting them go off and do these things. And it talks about the people that knew what Harvey was doing to various degrees, and who can be won over, who will crack. There's one character who was an accountant that once he was kind of confronted with the reality of everything, he's like, okay, I gotta do something about this. I didn't want to see it, but now that I've seen it, I gotta do something. Really solid film, and a massive flop. A massive flop. Hopefully it'll get some love in the awards and maybe get a re-release or something, because it's definitely worth seeing.
Or a good streaming deal.
Yeah. Number 3, Avatar: The Way of Water. I went to see it. I'm like, the effects should be good. It was immersive and not just visually, and the effects completely hold up. And of course they've advanced in the 13 years since the previous film. But what makes the movie work is that it becomes a different movie than the first one, because and nobody remembers the name of these characters from the first film, but they have kids. And
you mean people don't remember Jake Sully?
Yeah, people don't remember Jake Sully so much. See, that's the thing with this, is like they didn't strike when the iron was hot. I mean, it's such 13 years after to make a sequel to this most money-making movie of all time. And it felt like it was too long, and it felt like, it's going to be a disaster. But that's the thing with freaking James Cameron. He always sets things up like, I'm going to fail miserably. And then, he succeeds with this, and Avatar, and Titanic, and The Terminator, all of which could have been disasters, and all of which were just phenomenal and, still linger in the collective consciousness. But the kids make this my favorite type of story, which is the multi-generational family story. You're in The Beauty of the Lilies and Giants and East of Edens. And I am telling my brain to remember the name Sigourney Weaver, because Sigourney Weaver is really good in this. She plays 2 characters, her character from the original film, and that character had a child. So Sigourney Weaver is playing in stop-motion capture like a 12, 14-year-old girl and getting the mannerisms and the attitude and everything right. I really enjoyed it. I need to go and see it again while it's still in the theater. I did the whole IMAX 3D as big as you could see it. I don't necessarily have to see it in that format again, but I really feel like I should see it on the big screen a second time. Number 2, Babylon. I saw this twice. I saw it on I had 2 four-day weekends in a row. I saw it on a Monday, and then I saw it again on a Friday, just to process it again. This is an epic of early Hollywood, and the striving for success. It's a Damien Chazelle film. It's a companion piece to La La Land. They're the yin and yang of each other. It's the evil twin. La La Land was happy. You can succeed with your dreams. And this is, it will crush you. And it is good. It plays like a bunch of mini movies, because there's these long sequences. There's this super off-putting, decadent party that you're like, if the average America would have known this was going on, they would have burnt every theater in the country to the ground. And then you've got this day of filming on various films, all filming right next to each other out in the desert. You've got this descent into hell segment late in the film where they're trying to pay off this mobster that this actress owns money to, and he is like a totally drugged out Tobey Maguire. And then there's a scene of just trying to get an early, because this is about that transition from sound to talkies, and it spans 26 to 32 with a coda quite some time later. And everything that can go wrong in that process does go wrong. There's a lot of people that died needless deaths in this film. And that's just part of, he fell on that spear filming the action sequence. He always was a drinker. Decadent movie. Surfacey in many ways, but says a lot about the industry in just one film, and I just loved it. And my number one film for 2020 was The Fabelmans.
2022?
2022.
The Fabelmans?
The Fabelmans, which is...
I'm hearing some mixed reviews on The Fabelmans.
So this is Steven Spielberg telling a story that he had to tell, which is a fictionalized version of his childhood. He has said in interviews he had to wait for both parents to die before he could make this film. And he had the screenplay was co-written by...
Tony Kushner.
Tony Kushner, the Pulitzer Prize winning playwright of Angels in America, also wrote the screenplay for Spielberg's Lincoln film. It's a weird film-going experience, because if you know anything about Spielberg and you know about the films that he made subsequently, it's the backstory to all of that. And so it brings all this film history of a half century with it and kind of shows where all this stuff came from. And it is the opposite of Babylon in that it is a happy Hollywood story. Though it goes up to just the verge of its Spielberg surrogate, who does an excellent job of being the awkward, overly enthusiastic person we imagine Steven Spielberg would have been as a child. Just on the verge of their starting out in Hollywood, and then about the home life, about the stresses and the divorce and the moves and being a Jew in Arizona and California, and the weird dynamic of his parents, who were generally good parents, generally very loving, but they just weren't quite meshing. They were just too different. Moving, stirring, because it brought so much with it. It was, able to work its way to the top of the heap for movies of 2022.
Yeah.
I promised to be short. I wasn't short.
Yeah.
So does this bring anything else to mind? Do you have any...
No, I really
closing
didn't catch
thoughts?
that much from 2022. I'd had hopes and intentions of catching more. Circumstances combined, including all the editing of the podcast. A lot of time where I could watch more movies, I'm editing.
Yeah.
So
Because of me giving you more and more stuff to do.
yeah, it's all right. It's been fun.
Yeah.
And I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast.
Different Strokes, Facts of Life.
Okay. Looks good.
I reran some levels. They're reruns. I had more, but you cut me off.
You can keep going.
They should do a gritty reboot of Yogi Bear called Jellystone.
Okay.
And I hope that 1883 show brings back mutton chops. I'm in a mood.
Yeah.